As I walked past the churchwarden, she said, "I've never heard anything so wonderful about love." And I'm very proud of that.
Welcome to HIV The Morning After. I'm Dan Hall. I'm a documentary producer and director. I've spent my entire adult life watching ignorance and prejudice play out around HIV. And frankly, I'm tired of it. And I'm sure many of you are too. This podcast is an attempt to do something about that. Not through lectures or statistics, but by doing what I do best. Interviewing people and letting them tell their own stories. Real voices, lived experiences, no bullshit. These conversations matter, and if you think so too, please rate, review, and share HIV The Morning After. I can make these episodes, but I can't make people listen to them or find them on their algorithms. That bit's down to you. You can reach me at hivthemorningafter@gmail.com. Right then, let's get started. Today, I'm speaking with Peter Willis, an 83-year-old retired GP who brings a remarkable dual perspective to our conversation. Peter worked in the field during the height of the epidemic, treating patients and friends whilst living with the quiet assumption that he too was positive, long before his actual diagnosis. Now 3 decades into a marriage with his Japanese partner, Peter has discovered pottery, navigates a handful of pills twice a day, and offers us insights into aging with HIV that are both medically informed and deeply personal. Peter Willis, welcome to the show.
I'm happy to join you. Thank you.
Can you take us back to your time working as a GP during those early years of the HIV epidemic?
Being a GP in those very first days, I had the startling experience of sometimes people coming to me because their current GPs wouldn't treat them in the same way as they would a normal patient. And in 1 or 2 cases, we got the record envelopes they would sometimes reach me with HIV positive written in red on the outside of the packet. And this, of course, was very unethical. It was, apart from anything else, it told everybody who handled the records without even opening it that the patient had HIV and was probably gay.
What is it like for you from a professional perspective to be presented with a condition of which really you can do nothing? Or very little?
A big change from GU medicine when I started. One of the things I used to say about it was that it was a wonderful speciality because people would come in enormous distress and you could make everybody better. And then HIV came along where clearly initially you really couldn't do anything.
Now then, staying around this time or sort of in this early stage, you mentioned that you suspected that you were living with HIV. What gave you this suspicion?
My partner, Malcolm, died of AIDS after 16 years together. And to me, it was quite clear that he had AIDS. He didn't want to be tested. And in the early days, there was, as I've said, no point. But he was extremely busy in the theatre world and entirely engrossed in it. And he just didn't seem to want to be involved in that self-awareness of his illness. He wanted to get on with life.
But bearing that in mind, that must have been doubly difficult for you seeing patients coming in who are ill, getting iller and dying, when you were looking at these people across the table and each time, to some extent, possibly seeing yourself?
Very oddly, no. I don't understand that. It would be, it would probably take a psychoanalyst to help me understand, and I don't particularly want to spend the time on that or have sufficient interest. But it is odd, I think, that I didn't think that. I treated patients as patients and quite separate from me. And I didn't think of what was going to be happening to me. Once I had the diagnosis, I always assumed that I wouldn't have very long to live, 5 years at the most, and that was probably optimistic. My physician, he was a colleague and a friend, and we used to talk about HIV once it was established. After work, we talk about it, and it was he who eventually, looking after me, and my CD4 count had been very low for a long time. And I suppose, yes, I did actually get because of that, I did get the diagnosis of AIDS rather than just seropositive. It was he who said one day, I think you'd really quite like to retire, wouldn't you? And it was such a relief. I'd never thought I could retire. I mean, it didn't even take time off if you were ill as a GP. It was such an extra burden on your colleagues. But it was a huge relief. And in fact, I retired on the basis that I had less than 6 months to live, which was thought-provoking. And it took me quite a few years to realize that 6 months wasn't, it kept getting longer.
So what was the gay scene like in 1974 that you were inhabiting? Where was it? What was it like?
I suppose I've never been much in... even now I'm a bit uncoordinated when it comes to exercise classes. And I was never much good at dancing, a little self-conscious, well, probably very self-conscious. And I never thought that I was attractive. And so I wasn't terribly good at meeting people. I had lots of wonderful friends, and in particular, people I found very attractive. And I suspect they found me attractive. So my sex life wasn't very wild. I did go to, when I first discovered as a medical student, actually, I first discovered the Coleherne in Kensington. And it was fortunately just before I took my finals. I have often thought that if I'd discovered the gay world before then, I wouldn't have gone through my finals because I could spend more time gallivanting. I did meet in Birmingham a couple of older couples. Somehow or other I got introduced, and that was nice, but of course no actual sex, but it was nice to have gay company of it.
And of course you're less than a decade since decriminalisation.
Yes, that's right, which is another funny thing. I never really felt I was aware of being I've become aware since that I was a criminal. I haven't ever called it that. I just somehow, I didn't fit in the world. What I was not acceptable, but I just accepted that. And it was quite a game, sort of running, keeping out of sight. I was once cruising in Holland Walk, and attractive young fellow, and he whispered in my ear, if I were you, I'd get out of here. I'm a policeman. That was relevant because I just felt I couldn't cope with being in the magistrate's court in my practice area. So I cut back on a lot of activities which might have led to me getting arrested because I just couldn't face the prospect of being in the local newspaper as a GP.
So we're going to discuss now your diagnosis. What led you to finally deciding to take the test?
I was working, and it was actually a weekend when I was on call. I'd been getting more and more exhausted. And a friend who's a GP called me one out of the blue one weekend, and clearly understood that I was not well. He said, "I'm coming to see you." And he came round, and within a few minutes, he said, "I'm taking you to hospital." And I suppose in the back of my mind was the vague thought that it could be my assumed HIV. So we went to St Mary's, because in Middlesex I knew everybody. And they did an HIV antibody test, which was negative. But I was pretty ill. I was having a very bad seroconversion illness. It's the illest I've ever been in my life. And I persuaded the rather cautious and slightly unwilling doctors at St Mary's that I could go home. I hate being in hospital. And so I did go home. And after a couple of days, I called my own GP, and he said, "You've got to go back into hospital. You're cyanosed," which meant I was blue from not enough oxygen. And so I thought, well, since my HIV antibody test is negative, I'll go to the Middlesex where I know everybody. Oh, very nice. And so I was readmitted to the Middlesex, where they put me in a side ward. And it began to dawn on me what was going on. I mean, after all, I was a fairly experienced doctor. And I was admitted under Professor Sample, Steve Sample, a lovely man, professor of medicine at the Middlesex. And he was a great, one of the great reasons why the Middlesex became such a centre for HIV in those days. And one evening, Steve Sample came down and sat in a chair looking glum. And I thought, oh, poor Steve, how can I help him? And he said, "I'm sorry, I have bad news for you."
And so between your diagnosis and combination therapy coming through, it sounds like your body managed to just, tumble along. You weren't being hospitalized or being ill.
No, I think that's something intrinsic. I'm very fortunate. I seem to be what you might call, well, immunologically tough. But the second and almost as important was that combination therapy came along in the nick of time for me.
Before combination therapy did appear, besides your partner Malcolm, had the HIV virus killed anybody else in your life?
Oh, absolutely. My goodness, it was in your mind. You could, even people who didn't talk about it, you could see a lot of friends died. I used to say as a little sick joke that my social life was at Golders Green Crematorium. Yes, it did have a huge impact on life. And of course, in the cultural world, we lost a huge number of really creative people.
And with the passing of each of these people, did it ever reflect back on your own life? Did you ever look at these people and go, will they be coming to Golders Green Crematorium for me in 3 months?
No. Isn't that odd? I don't understand that. I got on with life. I didn't buy wine that needed keeping for longer than a few years. Things like that, but I didn't seem to get distressed by it. It's not what I was aware of. I wonder, is it all there suppressed deeply somewhere, and one day it's all... It's a bit late now, isn't it, for it all to suddenly give me a nervous breakdown.
You had had a professional relationship with HIV since it appeared, and you've been seeing patients, dealing with them. What did it feel like as a doctor, suddenly being able to turn around to people who are living with HIV and say, I can offer you effective treatment?
Oh, it's lovely, of course. It's wonderful. It really changes everything.
I mentioned at the start of the episode that you now take, quote, a handful of pills daily. What is your current health management like?
Well, I'm nearly 84. From the early days when I was on double rather than triple therapy, before there was triple available, I did develop some drug resistance. So there is some limitation on the drugs I could take now. So for that reason, I ended up on 3 drugs. And they work and have worked. I've got a perfectly normal or even higher than normal CD4 count, and HIV causes me no problems whatever.
What would you have thought in the 1980s if someone had told you you would be living as an 83-year-old?
I wouldn't have believed it, honestly. But I really, if you told me at the time, I just would have thought, well, it's very kind of you to say so, but I would have put it aside as being a kind thought.
Putting aside the normal, everyday things and frustrations that naturally come, and medical issues that naturally come with an aging body, have you been left with any legacies of your HIV treatment, or indeed your living with HIV?
HIV treatment in the early days, what I was on led to lipodystrophy, which meant that I lost my bottom and gained abdominal fat. So those are cosmetic disadvantages, but they're not big and haven't really troubled me.
What do you feel, though, the health systems and social care systems in this country need to make sure that they have in place for people living with HIV who are getting older, who might not have the level of everyday support that you have?
One thing that will improve, I hope, gradually is that HIV loses all stigma. That would be nice. I mean, I know it's a great deal less, but it must be hard on people who feel they can't talk freely about it. Support for older people is very important and needed, and is tending to become less in modern times, in recent times. I think such services as, well, home care, Meals on Wheels, district nurses, support groups and so on, they all rely heavily on, and the National Health Service generally relies very heavily on people believing very much in what they're doing and doing a great deal more than they're rewarded for. And I think we need to recognise that far more.
What did the concept of U equals U mean to you when that came through? Because that was a remarkable moment in the medical history of the HIV virus.
Absolutely wonderful. It is a wonderful idea that people no longer need to be fearful of having a relationship with somebody where they're Well, the other doesn't have HIV.
So, Peter, we're coming now towards the end of the episode, and this is the part where I take us to the Remembrance Garden in what was the grounds of the London Lighthouse. And I ask you if there is somebody who you would like to remember and share with us today.
Well, yes, of course. My partner, Malcolm Edwards. He was a wonderful person who I was in love with, I think, all the time for 16 years. It's remarkable, as I said at his funeral. He was ultimately a theatre director with his own little company, which was getting quite significant recognition and praise. He was the one who said he'd hoped I would go on living for both of us, and of course I have. He's very much present in our home here. I've been with my present partner for nearly twice as long as Malcolm, but we're both very much aware of Malcolm's influence on me and our home. His students he taught at the Guildhall School of Drama, and his one or two of his students have told me in more recent years that they never take a job without thinking whether Malcolm would approve. He was intensely critical of imperfection in theatre. He had been the only person in his school ever to take an O-level, so he was from a working-class background and entirely self-educated, to the point of being a real scholar. A lovely thing was that my youngest brother and his then, of course, much younger children were going on holiday to the mainland of Europe, and instead of leaving early in the morning, on the night when ultimately Malcolm died, they left early from Northampton to come down to London and spend the night with me. And I remember standing by the bedside for some time in silence, and then turning and realizing that niece and two nephews were standing there silently beside me. They had to leave after early in the morning to go down to Dover to get their ferry. But I stayed on and ultimately was lying in bed with Malcolm, and he was having terrible pain from pleurisy. I don't know whether he was conscious enough to hear me, but ultimately, and I must say this is difficult to do, and I sympathize and feel very much for others who have done it. But to say quietly in his ear, "It's all right, love, you can go. I'll be all right without you." And very soon he stopped trying to breathe and died. And we had a wonderful service with a standing room only, and his medical team and the nurses from the Middlesex were there, students from the Guildhall, his parents, my mother, and I walked in and sat down in the front, and I thought, I'm not going to be able to say anything. But then I heard Malcolm's voice, as it were, calling from on high somewhere, saying, "It's absolutely unforgivable to let personal emotions interfere with a performance." And I thought, right. And I got up and gave my 20-minute little talk. And as we all walked out with the bell of St. Botolph's tolling, which I hadn't expected, and the organist managing on the oldest organ in London to play "There'll Be a Place for Us, a Time and Place for Us, and Take My Hand and I'll Lead You There," the organist heroically managing to play this. And as I walked past the churchwarden, she said, "I've never heard anything so wonderful about love." And I'm very proud of that.
Finally, if you could send a postcard to the world, Peter, what would your message be on it?
Enjoy life. Be happy. Don't worry about challenges you can't achieve. And I know this is a futile message to a great deal of the world where life is perfectly ghastly. But if we have the good fortune to have opportunities, comfort, and friends and lovers, enjoy it and make the most of it and live your life.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of HIV The Morning After. My sincere thanks to you, Peter Willis, for joining us. Thank you very much.
It's been most interesting, and thank you.
If you were moved or informed by what you heard today, please help spread the word. Subscribe to HIV The Morning After and leave a rating and a review. It makes a huge difference in helping others to find it. Your support helps to amplify these experiences. If you'd like to get in touch, suggest a guest, or share your own thoughts, you can email me at hivthemorningafter@gmail.com. And remember, if you encounter HIV stigma in a bar, call it out. If you encounter it at work, call it out. If you encounter it online, call it out. Because if you don't, you're part of the problem. The theme tune is by Pauline Nidu at unstoppablemonsters.com. And many thanks to Murray Lang for his continued support. And thank you for listening. Join me next time for another important conversation on HIV The Morning After. I've been Dan Hall.